Vaucluse House is a place with a rich history, stunning gardens and million-dollar views. Later on, I'll be meeting a horticulturist who's going to take me behind the scenes to see just what makes this 150-year-old place tick. But first, let's see what else is on this week's show.
I know April 1st is come and gone, but you may feel like a bit of a fool if you don't take advantage of this whole month to get your alliums in.
And I'm in a garden which is a blaze of colour all year round, thanks in no small part to a chance encounter and a very generous gift.
And I'm at a large nursery looking at colourful foliage plants to bring a tropical feel to your garden.
I'm getting a feel for what it would have been like back in the 1850s. Now, this outfit's a tad warm and a bit snug, but I kind of like this fob chain. And it's making me feel right at home in Vaucluse House, a stunning and historic property right on the harbour foreshore in Sydney's east. When William Wentworth, famous for being one of the first Europeans to cross the Blue Mountains, lived here with his wife, 10 children and 30 servants, this place was massive. It had 200 hectares of orchards, vegetable and ornamental gardens, and even its own private beach on the harbour. Well, it's time to change these clothes and get into something a bit more comfortable so I can get out and explore the garden. Nowadays, the house and its 10-hectare grounds are managed by the Historic Houses Trust of New South Wales.
This is a Victorian Garden-esque garden, which means that every plant has its own space. You can see it as a specimen plant, as they would have planted it back in the Wentworth era.
Anita Rayner is a horticulturist, and she's inspired by the heritage buildings and, of course, the gardens.
I have been here now for 9 years, and I would say this is one of the most beautiful spots in Sydney. And I feel it's a privilege to work in these gardens because they provide a snapshot in time of where we've come from as gardeners in this country. And here we are at the Pleasure Garden.
Nice entry point. What's behind the name?
Well, the Pleasure Garden was designed to pleasure the senses. So Lady Wentworth would have brought her guests down here and they would have experienced the pleasure of seeing the plants, the pleasure of hearing the gravel crunching gently under their feet and hearing the breeze. The plants themselves would have been showy, so they would inspire a conversation. For example, this crepe myrtle, I mean, look at the beautiful flowers, that really vibrant kind of flower that really attracts the eye.
It's really like a jewel for them to show off and say, well, look at what I've got.
Exactly. Look what I've brought back from my trip overseas.
Cannas are a classic from that era, aren't they?
They are. And the Victorians loved red foliage. So you can see the red colour of the canna there, which now is a little bit weedy, but that's the thing about the plants of this era. What made them so successful back then has made them a little bit too successful now, so people generally don't want to have them in the gardens. But if you keep them under control, they can be a nice addition.
And the trees here, I mean, they've really got some size about them.
We still have a few original plantings here. Like, look at this huge Port Jackson fig. I think it's about 150 years old.
So would have this been planted by the Wentworths?
We think so. It's a really iconic Sydney tree. And here is another original planting, the biggest Norfolk Island hibiscus I've ever seen.
Wow, that is huge.
This is one of my favourite areas of the whole garden here in Vaucluse House because this is the productive kitchen garden. And this is what would have fed the Wentworths and their family and their servants because they would have been a long way from Sydney, so they had to provide their own food.
What are some of the species here, and are they heritage like the ones in the rest of the garden?
Yes, everything in here is an heirloom variety, so we try not to go past vegetables that are later than 1850, or mostly we don't. Like, for instance, this jam melon here, it's not edible raw, but it has a very high pectin content. So what they used to do, if they had strawberries or pineapple, for example, and they wanted to make jam and they wanted to make those things go further, they would fill it out with the jam melon. These melons could be stored for up to a year, so they could even use them longer than the initial period when they made the jam. Here's an interesting old-fashioned pumpkin called a Turk's turban.
Yeah.
You can see why it's called a Turk's turban, because it looks like a Turk's turban.
It does, doesn't it? I'm seeing them pop up in school gardens, and they're nice because it just makes kids think differently about where plants have come from, and there's good stories to be told, really. Wow.
Well, here we are on the very edge of the Vaucluse estate on beautiful Sydney Harbour.
Any gardener would love to have a view of this calibre looking out onto the water. How spectacular is this?
Pretty special. Not only is this a snapshot of our history, it's a publicly owned garden and it's here for everybody to enjoy.
People love orchids, and for good reason. These are the wonderful Phalaenopsis orchids in all of their colour. Now, people often ask me, what do you do when they get like that? The flowers are finishing off, they're wilting, they're dying. Well, that's the end of their season. But if you cut back 20 or 30 centimetres from the flowers down to this point down here, there's the node where I'm going to cut, and I'm just going to cut just above that node. Throw that bit away, but what you'll find in about 6 to 8 weeks is that will send out a shoot on which there'll be new buds and new flowers. How simple is that? Give it a go.
And I'm often asked, do you still have to water plants in, even on irrigation? Well, the answer is absolutely no matter what. Always water plants in right after planting. It helps settle them in, helps flush out air pockets which can dry roots out and damage them, and it also helps to reduce planting shock.
Make a note in your diary. April is allium month. Now you might not know, but allium is the Latin name for garlic. But it also refers to the genus of plants that are onions, chives, leeks, shallots, and of course, garlic. Timing is important for most veggie crops, but for alliums, it's essential. Their growth patterns correspond with how much sunshine they get. So that's day length and temperature. To get big, fat garlics or onions, you need to make sure they have a lot of leaf growth before the day lengthens. When this happens, they stop growing leaves and they start growing bulbs. Alliums hate a crowd, meaning they hate to compete for space. From things like weeds, big sticks, large bits in the soil like rocks, as well as large clods. This is especially important for subterranean alliums like garlic. So you need to make sure that you've cultivated your soil well, so it's light and fluffy and friable. They also like a sweeter soil, so I'm adding a good handful of dolomite lime every square metre. This will raise the pH of the soil by 1 and add a good amount of calcium and magnesium, which will give these plants a good start and keep them growing healthy through the season. The soil here at the patch is beautiful, but I'm still digging it over well to break up the clods. If your soil isn't quite up to scratch, you might need to add a barrel load of homemade compost every 2 square metres or so. And you can try a bit of aged manure, but never use it fresh. You'll just end up with soft, sappy, pest-prone onions. There are hundreds of different varieties of garlic, and the good news is there'll be 1 or 2 that are well suited to your conditions. My advice would be try a couple of varieties. They all mature at different times, which means you'll be able to enjoy your garlic for a lot longer throughout the year. I've got 3 varieties today. I've got the Spanish Roja or Spanish Red. It's a tight little bulb that has nice little cloves, really punchy with the flavour. The other one is a Dungansky. It's a pretty monstrous sized bulb. This usually indicates a lack of taste, but I guarantee you that this one is jam-packed full of flavour. And the last one is the elephant garlic. Technically, it's a leek with a nice smooth flavour. And if you're in a warmer part of the country, this might be the variety for you. Break your bulbs apart into individual cloves, remembering to leave the papery coating on. Always choose the biggest of your cloves. These will perform the best. Now here's a good little tip. As garlic needs a good chill to start shooting, I like to plant in furrows, so the cloves are just covered. I found they shoot well, and as they grow, you can backfill around them. Plant them about 15 centimetres apart, and remember, pointy end up. Now I know the elephant garlic is a leek, but plant it just like a garlic. Here's a fairly unusual one. I've had a lot of success with these in my own garden. They're called a potato or multiplier onion, and they get this name because they multiply as rampantly as potatoes do. Now they're a small onion, and you'd be forgiven for thinking they're a shallot. They're in the same group, but whereas shallots are long and skinny, potato onions are short and fat. Now I'm going to give them about 20 centimetres apart because they multiply a lot, and from one bulb you can get up to 30 developing. I've planted a lot of bulbs today, but some plants do better as seedlings, like leeks. Now I know it's getting a little bit late in the season, but this particular variety, Durabel, should go well into the spring. And if they do bolt, then that's not a problem because the flowers are absolutely beautiful. Now you space them about 10 centimetres apart. I like to use a stick. Just make a nice big hole and plant them quite deeply. That way, you'll get a good, juicy, succulent stem to nibble on. Probably the easiest and quickest allium to grow would be the spring onion. I've got a variety called Redbeard, which produces a thick red base. They're so simple to plant. Just lay the individual seedlings in a furrow and then backfill to cover the roots. Don't worry about standing the stringy little things up. In a few days, they'll do that themselves. I'm watering in the seedlings of the spring onions and the leeks, but not the bulbs. That's because they're not in active growth, so if you keep them too wet, they can rot in the ground. Well, to recap, April is allium month. Cultivate your soil well, sweeten it with a little bit of lime, and plant them in an open, sunny position. Well, that's shallot.
My name's Amy Duncan and I'm a professional tattoo artist with a particular interest in tattooing botanical imagery. I'm particularly fascinated by plants because humans have such a strong relationship with them. They provide us with food and medicine and all sorts of amazing things that we couldn't do without. I got interested in them when I was about 15. My parents would have liked it if I'd done something a little less unconventional, but they're proud of me now. The thing that draws me to fruit and flowers and other botanical subjects is that they're always going to be beautiful and they're never going to go out of style, or they have a classic beauty to them that everybody can appreciate. Because they're organic forms, they always work well on the body. It's easy to drape them beautifully over the skin and make them look graceful, and I just think they're timeless subjects that will never go out of style.
They're beautiful. I love the way that they are so elegant, the way that they fall together. Yeah, I love the overlapping, the underlapping, all the textures, all the colours, the way that the grapes hang and the petals unfold, and yeah, it's really quite poetic in the shapes of things. She's amazing. Yeah, I'd better say that now because she's drilling my leg, but...
Tash is a wonderful client. She sits really well, and she's let me have a lot of freedom with this piece, which is really fun. I've really been able to sort of try out a few new things I haven't done before, and really take a big chunk of skin to work on as well, which is a real treat, you know, to have a whole leg to sort of decorate is really fun. So, yeah, it's been a blast working with Tashi on this. It's a really rewarding job that I feel really grateful for. And I enjoy spending time with my clients too. They're all really lovely people, and I enjoy the time to just sit with someone and talk. This is a design for a client of mine that I've done a few botanical style tattoos on. She's a gardener and loves her natives. She's got some grevillea in here and some happy wanderer and flowering gum with a little fairy wren on there as well. Native plants are nearly all really hard to tattoo because there's lots of little hard, wiry petals, millions of them, that are really hard to capture. So often it's a challenge to simplify them enough to make them appropriate for tattooing. But I also enjoy the fine details. This was a client who requested a botanical illustration of an eggplant, and she provided references from an eggplant she grew in her own vegetable garden. So that was really nice because it meant that she got her own eggplant tattooed on her. That was, you know, something that was special to her, the experience of learning how to garden and learning how to grow her own food. I was really excited when she asked me to do it because it's such an unusual design for a tattoo. I've never done one before, and they are sort of beautiful. There's something about the colour and the simplicity of the form, and I like doing unusual plants. I've definitely got a few more years of tattooing in me yet. Yeah, I'm really enjoying it at the moment. I've got really, really lovely clients and I'm getting to do really fun work. But I don't have my heart set on just tattooing plants necessarily. I'm always open to new things, but I think they'll always be part of what I do because they are just timeless.
I love foliage. They create the bones in every garden. And tropical foliage, well, nothing says tropical better than big leaves and bold colours. And I'm going to show you some of my favourites. First up, crotons. For a sense of place, nothing says we're in the tropics better than crotons. And if there was one I'd recommend, this is it, Mammy. It has an interesting twist to the leaf. The great thing about this plant is that it has so many different colours. They open green, they go through yellow, through orange and into red. But the colours are not static. The colours change every single season. And for any croton to survive and thrive, all it needs is well-composted, freely draining soil and 6 hours sunshine and a bit of a drink during dry weather. It's a wonderful plant. Try it. Next, the bromeliad. Of all the bromeliads, Alcantaria has to be one of the best. This is plum purple, and you'll probably buy them as small plants like this, about 2 years old, but they'll grow until they're about 7. Now, the joy about these plants is they add wow. So you have these by the entrance to the garden, and they make a real statement. It's also non-spiny, which is a joy to work with, and they take full sun, so they're very, very flexible. Next, philodendrons. Wherever you live in Australia, you can enjoy the tropical effect of philodendrons. Classics like these make a wonderful indoor plant, and you don't need a lot of light. They like a little bit of shelter. This one here, Xanadu, this has got to be the most bulletproof tropical foliage plant that there is. But if you want fabulous foliage, these philodendrons are the ones. Tropical gold and silver. Look at these leaves. They're great colours and patterns. This plant captures bright light even on a gloomy day. By contrast, in really intense light, the silver of this plant is cooling. These plants need well-composted soil, but they'll grow quite happily in ordinary potting mix. To boost the humidity in dry weather, mist them with a little bit of moisture, once or twice a day. And finally, chlorophytum. This one is a much neglected foliage plant. Over the years, I've grown thousands of these plants and they look best planted en masse. All they need is a little bit of filtered light, well-composted soil and a bit of moisture, and they will glow. This chlorophytum has entirely different foliage. This is green-orange. It's best grown in an orchid mix, because while it likes moisture, it must have perfect drainage. It has a wonderful colour to the undersides of the leaves. These stems are best appreciated from the side. So put this in a wall garden or a hanging basket and enjoy. We've seen some tropical foliage plants which will bring durable colour and can be used as accents in your garden. I've shown you a few of my favourites. Now it's over to you. Experiment and have a bit of fun.
This is my homie, a farming hoe that was developed in Asia, and I get a lot of use out of this tool in the veggie garden. It's great for digging little holes for putting seedlings in, as well as making furrows to plant seed. You can chip weeds out with it, as well as lightly aerating around the root zones of plants. A great little tool like this can make your gardening so much easier.
How you going?
All right, yep.
Need a hand?
Just clearing out these things.
Meet Kate and Hugh Walwork, a passionate couple of gardeners who've realised their dream of creating a colourful garden on their large block at Stirling in the Adelaide Hills. And there's nothing that adds colour like dahlias.
You can't tell me this isn't really one of the most beautiful of dahlias. It's not as big and effective as some of them, but it's got much more appeal.
Look at that, and I really like the shape, and I think it's very sort of touchable, if you know what I mean. It's just very beautiful.
This garden is just gorgeous. How old is it?
Well, this part of the garden was finished 14 months ago. We've got single dahlias, we've got fimbriated ones with sort of slightly frilly edges. There are decoratives and cactus. We've really got a collection, really.
It's interesting to discover that while they'd always liked dahlias, Kate and Hugh didn't set out to become collectors. In fact, a chance meeting was the cause of it all.
Well, we were at a gardener's market and I was just looking at the plants and the fellow next to me said, "Do you like dahlias?" And I just said, "Well, yeah." And he said, "Oh, well, my dad's got a collection of dahlias and he's gone to nursing home, so you can have them if you like."
Wow, and how many were there?
500 plants in the end that we planted. That was even including some, you know, the big tubers. I had this vision that I was going to have a green garden, that I wasn't going to have any colour at all, and I'd just buy lots of evergreens that I wouldn't have to do very much work at all.
I guess
but Hugh likes colour.
I like an outrageous amount of colour, so and he wanted it all year round. So, yes, it adds more fun, makes it more interesting. As long as you can control it, you don't want to have just too much colour all splashed together. So we have themed the garden in terms of like a white garden and a purple sort of garden.
So I love the strong colours here.
Yes, we're really wanting to try to create a sunset border with the colours of orange and yellow and all of the colours of the sunset. Some of those colours that other people don't like in their gardens, we really rather like the challenge of growing orange and those really sort of spectacular, bold colours.
While they dominate the summer months, dahlias don't tell the whole story of the garden. Set on 1/3 of a hectare of gently sloping ground, the garden is distinctly cottage in style, with a mixed planting of flowering shrubs, perennials, bulbs and roses, which add splashes of colour in the well-maintained borders. So you've developed your garden to be a series of garden rooms, and they seem to flow beautifully from one to another.
Well, initially we had it sloping in two directions, so we had to think about how would we make that work. So we had to create a series of terraces. So we wanted to have a terrace at the top level for the house, and also a large flat area where kids could play, or we could, sit around and eat and have a nice sitting area.
But the dahlias keep calling me back, and I couldn't help wondering if Kate and Hugh had their favourites.
These types of dahlias are really my favourites. On a practical level, they're really good because they don't need staking, but they're also very floriferous. I like the contrasting leaf colour, and the open sort of face to the flower is I think is most attractive, and the bees like them. Because they're open like this, the bees like them, so you get a lot of bee activity, and they actually then hybridise, and we get new seedlings coming from them. So on a whole lot of levels, I think these would be my favourite for the garden.
The singles do have a simple elegance about them, I agree.
Yeah. I really like the large decoratives. This one, this pale pink one, I think that's a lovely one.
Look at the size of that.
I like its shape. I like the colour, holds its form really well. This one actually, probably is my favourite of all, to be perfectly honest. I love the colour. I just think that's just amazing.
And that's part of the original collection you got?
Yes, it was, and we managed to save it. We picked that out as one of our favourites when they first came out. This big surprise when we saw them all blooming. We thought that was one of our favourites.
Nature is awesome when you look at that, isn't it?
Absolutely beautiful. Couldn't make that if you've dreamt it up.
Well, this is a spectacular way to honour a man and his collection of dahlias.
Yeah, we thought that it was just really important to maintain them. We'd really like them to know that we looked after them.
Well, that's it for this week. Now, it's a great time of year to spend some time outdoors. So why don't you get out there and get stuck into a garden project of your own this weekend? In the meantime, here's what's coming up on next week's show.
To stay looking good, native plants do need maintenance, and I'll give you some useful tips on how to go about it.
I'm visiting a professor who's turned an old fiberglass pool into a fantastic aquatic garden.
And I'll be visiting a fabulous ornamental garden, and you wait till you see the vegetable patch. It's enormous.